Beneath the ancient sun, the world trembled with new ambition. From swamps and river deltas rose creatures of calculation, jaws honed, eyes unblinking, patience made flesh. They were not built for speed, but for mastery, not born to flee, but to rule. In their rise, Earth itself learned a new rhythm, one of silence, strike, and survival. This is the story of how the hunters became the architects of power, and how the Age of Reptiles began its long reign. Witness the dawn of dominion when power first took form in scale and bone. The age before teeth, the Carboniferous world shimmered with heat and haze. Swamps stretched from horizon to horizon, tangled with club mosses that rose like living towers, their trunks sheathed in scales of bark. Beneath their shadow, the air lay heavy with moisture, rich with the scent of decay. In this damp paradise, life had found abundance, but not freedom. Every breath was a negotiation with water, every movement bound by its presence. For more than 50 million years, amphibians ruled here not as tyrants, but as tenants of a fragile domain. They were creatures shaped by the stillness of ponds and the patience of rain. Their bones were soft, porous, filled with marrowless channels that whispered of dual existence, one foot in water, one on land. Fossils from coal seams in Europe and North America reveal their legacy. Eriops, with its broad skull and muscular limbs, Diplocaulus, its head flared like a boomerang, and the sinuous Crassigyrinus, trapped forever between the fish it had been and the reptile it would never become. In them, evolution had experimented with courage, lungs for air, legs for movement, skin that could drink from the world around it. Yet these gifts carried weakness, for the same skin that nourished them betrayed them to dryness. The late Carboniferous climate began to change. Geological evidence from paleosols, ancient soil layers preserved in the rock record, shows increasing oxidation and desiccation around 305 million years ago. The global swamps began to contract as glaciation advanced in the southern hemisphere. The great coal forests of Gondwana receded, and inland basins grew dry under erratic monsoons. Where amphibians had once bred by the thousands, their eggs now cracked in the heat. Amphibian lineages collapsed as freshwater pools vanished, leaving behind only the resilient few and the promise of a new experiment in life. It was within this crucible of loss that the amniotic egg emerged, one of evolution's quiet revolutions. Unlike the gelatinous spheres of their ancestors, the amniote's egg carried a private ocean within. Encased in a leathery shell, it contained 3 membranes, the amniotic, chorion, and allantois, each designed to sustain life in isolation from open water. Fossil trackways from Nova Scotia and early amniote skeletons, such as Hylonomus and Paleothyrus, reveal that by 312 million years ago, vertebrates had already begun to lay eggs beyond the wetlands. The embryo now floated in its own world of safety, cradled by chemistry and sealed against desiccation. This single innovation would unshackle entire lineages from dependency on the swamp. To step beyond the pools, the first reptiles needed armour. The evolution of keratinized scales, a protective barrier derived from skin proteins, transformed vulnerability into endurance. Microscopic impressions on early reptilian fossils suggest scales that reduced water loss by more than 80% compared to amphibian skin. These scales, once simple folds, would later form the mosaic of resilience we now associate with the reptile world. Beneath them, bones thickened and limbs strengthened to support movement across uneven ground. The shift from sprawling, paddle-like appendages to pillar-like limbs signalled a fundamental change, one of posture, but also of purpose. As the continents fused into Pangaea, The geography itself became an engine of change. Inland regions drifted farther from moisture-bearing winds, and the first great deserts of deep time spread across the supercontinent's interior. Radiometric dating of the red beds of Texas and the sandstones of the Ural region places this environmental transformation between 299 and 280 million years ago, a span during which the earliest true reptiles diversified. Their fossils appear in patterns that trace migration routes from coastal wetlands into arid uplands, suggesting not just survival, but exploration. Where amphibians retreated, reptiles advanced, their lungs more efficient, their blood warmer under the sun. Each adaptation echoed a new philosophy of existence. The amphibian had been a borrower of water, of humidity, of stability. The reptile was a maker. Its body manufactured dryness into survival, its lungs filled with reserves of air, and its blood vessels expanded to manage heat and scarcity alike. Oxygen isotope data from fossilized bones indicate that some early reptiles regulated temperature internally, a primitive step toward thermoregulation. This was not yet warm-bloodedness, but it was intent, a signal that life was learning how to master its own chemistry in defiance of climate. Predation, too, was transforming. Teeth conical, serrated, set deep into sockets, appeared in early reptilian jaws. Fossilized skulls of Captohynus and Petrolacosaurus show evidence of tooth replacement, a mechanism that would allow continuous feeding without weakness. In the same strata where amphibian bones show signs of drought-induced mortality, these new predators appear leaner and hungrier. Their diet was no longer limited to insects or small prey. For the first time, terrestrial ecosystems saw vertebrates feeding upon one another entirely on land, an innovation that would redefine power in the biosphere. The Carboniferous air itself was changing, thick with oxygen levels approaching 35%, the highest in Earth's history. Insects grew to monstrous proportions. Dragonflies with wingspans of 70 centimeters, millipedes longer than a man's arm. Yet as the swamps dried, these oxygen-rich refuges contracted, and the giants perished. The reptiles that followed breathed air of decreasing abundance, their lungs growing stronger, their rib cages expanding to pump harder against the thinning sky. Each anatomical shift etched in bone a record of endurance of lungs that did not depend on stagnation, but on movement and muscle. Paleontologists studying the Joggins fossil cliffs in Nova Scotia, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, have uncovered tree stump fossils containing the remains of Hylonomus, one of the oldest known reptiles. It lived roughly 312 million years ago, about 20 centimeters long, with delicate teeth suited to insects and thin limbs for climbing. To imagine it is to see independence in miniature, a creature hatched from an egg on dry soil, its scales gleaming under filtered sunlight, no longer needing to return to the pond that birthed its ancestors. The boundary between water and land was, for the first time, broken not by necessity, but by design. And as evolution rewrote its code in bone and breath, ecosystems began to change in kind. Plants adapted alongside their new neighbours, evolving seeds that mirrored the amniote egg, small vessels of self-contained life, resistant to drought and decay. The co-evolution of reptiles and seed plants shaped the landscapes that followed, turning swamp forest into woodland and woodland into savanna. The very structure of the Carboniferous atmosphere, once dominated by humidity, gave way to cycles of aridity and rain. In this alternation, the rhythm of the future was set. A planet no longer ruled by water, but by land. The amphibians lingered in pockets of shade, relics of a wetter world. Some, like Gerathorax, survived into the Triassic, breathing through the roof of their skulls as their kin vanished. But their dominance had ended. The Earth's direction had changed, tilting toward the endurance of the dry, the scaled, the egg-bound. In the fossil record, this transition is not sudden, but it is absolute, an ancient migration from dependency to autonomy, from fragile skin to armoured permanence. The world's first reptiles did not roar or conquer. They crept, slow and deliberate, across mud and leaf litter, carrying with them a revolution invisible to sound. Their footprints, pressed into the drying clay, record not just movement but emancipation, a step away from the element that once defined life itself. In that quiet departure, the planet felt its balance shift. Beyond the stagnant waters, under the widening sun, a new kind of creature walked, one that no longer waited for the rains to fall, scales and survival. What once rippled with amphibian life now lies cracked and gleaming, a mosaic of clay and fossil air. From the edges of these vanishing swamps, movement stirs slower, heavier, but certain. Creatures that once hid from the sun now face it. On the banks where damp breath turns to dust, bodies are changing, skin thickens, eyes narrow, muscles coil beneath a hide that glints in the glare. The age of moisture begins to retreat, and in its wake, endurance takes root. Scales hardened, eggs sealed, lungs deepened. Adaptation became armour, written not in stone, but in skin. Each new layer of keratin, that same protein that would one day form claws, feathers, and nails, was a shield against desiccation, a barrier between life and air. Unlike the slick bodies of amphibians, these early reptiles carried their reservoirs within. Their skin no longer begged the swamp for water, it denied evaporation altogether. In the red beds of Nova Scotia's Joggins Formation, fossils of Hylonomus, the earliest known true reptile, preserve the story of this transformation. Delicate ribs, splayed toes, a body no longer bound to ponds but shaped for the forest floor. Adaptation, in its simplest form, is architecture, the body remade for dryness. The amniotic egg was that architecture perfected. Within its layered walls, chorion, amniotic membrane, allantois life learned to construct a portable ocean. No longer would reproduction demand the sanctuary of water. Embryos floated in self-contained worlds, nourished by yolk and guarded by shell. This design was revolutionary, a self-sustaining ecosystem small enough to cradle in clawed hands. Fossilized egg impressions from the early Permian reveal this biological leap, a sign that evolution had moved its workshop from the shallows to the sun. Across the sandbanks, reptilian tracks drew the first maps of terrestrial confidence. To walk on land was no longer a desperate crawl, it was possession. Limbs thickened, girdles broadened, and vertebrae locked into frameworks that resisted gravity's pull. Muscles that once powered swimming now drove strides across sediment and stone. Fossilized trackways from the Tambach Formation in Germany show this momentum. Claws digging into firm ground, tails lifted clear, bodies held high. These creatures, descendants of soft-bodied ancestors, carried their past as scaffolding but no longer as limitation. Over millions of years, bone density increased, skulls reinforced, and lungs grew labyrinthine, a cathedral of air sacs and capillaries fine-tuned for drought. Paleobiologists have measured these respiratory structures in fossil cross-sections, noting the shift from thin-walled amphibian lungs to the complex alveolar patterns seen in early amniotes. Dry air, thin and warm, demanded precision. Every breath was an act of conservation. In this new world, to waste moisture was to invite extinction. Where amphibians gasped, reptiles thrived. The collapse of the Carboniferous swamps had turned once fertile wetlands into a patchwork of desiccated plains. Isotopic analyses from ancient sediments indicate a sharp drop in humidity and an increase in seasonality, the Earth entering a cycle of long droughts and brief deluges. This climatic instability erased the dominance of those tied to water and opened continents to those who could wander without it. Reptiles, with their sealed skin and self-contained eggs, became the first true masters of independence. In the red dust of the early Permian, another lineage emerged. Captorhinus, small but relentless, its fossil bones etched with the hallmarks of terrestrial certainty. Multicuspid teeth hint at a varied diet, including insects, plants, and carrion, a flexibility that made survival more likely in shifting ecosystems. Each jaw held not just strength, but strategy. Around them, the land teemed with opportunity, arthropods, seed ferns, and the remains of dying amphibians. The hunt had moved beyond the water's edge. With claws to tear and lungs to sustain, reptiles became predators in landscapes that had never known pursuit. Independence carried a cost. Freed from the water's protection, reptiles faced a harsher physics, heat by day, cold by night, no cushion of fluid to buffer extremes. Their hearts, once three-chambered like their amphibian kin, began to partition, improving circulation to maintain body heat and endurance. Some developed behavioral thermoregulation, basking, burrowing, sheltering under a rock to manage the day's furnace. Fossil burrows from the Karoo Basin preserve the shape of these refuges, their walls lined with claw marks, each chamber a testament to foresight in an unforgiving climate. By the mid-Permian, dry forests spread across the joined continents of Pangaea, and reptilian diversity surged. Paleontologists chart this proliferation through bone beds in Texas, Russia, and South Africa, hundreds of specimens spanning dozens of genera. Among them was Mesosaurus, one of the first reptiles to return to the water, proof that mastery of land brought freedom to roam between worlds. Evolution was no longer a one-way climb. It had become a dance of adaptation, each lineage experimenting with form and function. Some would give rise to the mammal-like synapsids, others to the sprawling sauropsids that would one day dominate as dinosaurs and birds. In the rhythm of survival, structure mirrored purpose. Scales thickened into armor, claws sharpened into tools, and sensory systems evolved to read the dry air. Nasal cavities deepened for moisture retention, eyelids toughened into transparent shields. Even color began to matter. Fossil pigment traces suggest camouflage and thermoregulation, playing roles long before mammals dreamt of fur. These were not crude creatures. They were engineers of endurance, refining every surface for function under an unyielding sun. Yet there was still a quiet beneath the motion. For every success, extinction hovered. The fossil record speaks in absence's layers, where species vanish, replaced by forms more suited to thirst. Each drought, each shift in oxygen or rainfall, pruned the lineage but strengthened what remained. Reptiles endure by iteration, not luck. Their story was written in scarcity, their triumph measured not in abundance but in persistence. And so the land hardened under their steps. From marsh to dune, from shadow to glare, their dominion expanded with the sun. The earth, once a planet of shallow waters, now echoed with the scrape of claws on stone. In this brightness, hunger evolved alongside endurance. Eyes sharpened for motion, jaws aligned for strike, and the first true hunters of the dry world emerged. Beneath the unblinking light, scales shimmered, not as armor alone, but as promise. The age of conquest had begun. Lords of the red deserts, the shimmer of scales disappeared as the sun turned fierce and the land grew bare. The sun climbed higher, and the air thickened with heat. Where once green swamps hummed with amphibian calls, only the wind now moved dry, rasping, relentless. Pools that had cradled the last amphibians cracked into mosaics of clay. Reptiles, armoured in keratin and certainty, pressed farther inland, drawn toward the vastness of a new empire, the deserts of Pangaea. Across those endless plains, wind sculpted bones into monuments. Dunes rose and fell like frozen waves, painting the horizon in copper and ochre. The supercontinent's heart stretched thousands of kilometres from any sea, a world where humidity rarely returned. Atmospheric models derived from paleosol data suggest annual rainfall below 150 millimetres, barely enough to sustain the sparse conifers and seed ferns that clung to life. The sky hung heavy with dust, filtering sunlight into a perpetual red haze. Here, in the furnace of the earth, survival was not a chance. It was craft. Dimetrodon moved like a shadow stretched across the dust, deliberate, low, and efficient. Nearly 3 meters long, it bore a sail of vertebral spines reaching over 1 meter high, each grooved for blood vessels. CT scans of fossilized spines reveal vascular canals dense as capillary webs, a living radiator, converting sunlight into speed. The sail's surface area, relative to body mass, was over twice that of its prey, allowing Dimetrodon to warm rapidly at dawn and hunt before others stirred. Its skull, deep and triangular, bore the first hint of the synapsid condition, a single temporal opening that allowed stronger jaw muscles and a new kind of bite, one designed to seize and finish. Predation, in this age, became architecture. Muscles locked into new configurations, limbs rotated beneath the body for precision instead of sprawl, and ribs thickened to support deep lungs suited to dry air. Synapsids, though not yet mammals, were already experimenting with internal heat control, a transition visible under the microscope. Thin sections of their limb bones reveal growth rings spaced irregularly, a sign of fluctuating metabolic rates. In contrast, their reptilian contemporaries display even seasonal patterns, betraying dependence on the sun. Where reptiles endured, synapsids strategized. Their prey, vast and armoured, evolved defences of bulk and bone. Edaphosaurus, the plant-eating cousin of Dimetrodon, grazed among low brush and horsetails. Its sail, unlike the predators, was cross-braced with bony struts, a design suited less for heat and more for energy storage, possibly as a fat reserve during lean seasons. Its skull was small, its jaw blunt, its pace unhurried. Yet fossils of Edaphosaurus often bear tooth marks that match Dimetrodon's serrations perfectly, testimony that even the best adaptation ends in another's hunger. Over 10 million years, bodies diversified into engines of heat and hunger. In the fossil-rich beds of Texas and the Karoo Basin of South Africa, layers of red mudstone preserve an unbroken chronicle of this arms race. Bone isotopes extracted from these strata show seasonal temperature fluctuations of over 20 degrees Celsius, with daytime highs often exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Oxygen isotope ratios drop sharply toward the Permian's end, signalling a global decline in atmospheric oxygen down to 15% by some estimates. In such air, breathing itself became an evolutionary test. Across the sunburnt horizon, the Gorgonopsids appeared. Saber-toothed hunters of the late Permian, their skulls fused grace and brutality. Inostrancevia, found in Russia's Mezan River deposits, stretched over 4 meters in length, its canines longer than a man's hand. Each bite was guided by hinge joints, allowing massive jaw rotation, a biological trapdoor. The forward-facing eyes and enlarged olfactory bulbs recorded in fossil endocasts reveal a hunter that could track, judge depth, and plan. This was not instinct alone, but a sharpened intelligence emerging through predation. In the same layers, paleobotanists find impressions of Glossopteris leaves a hardy seed fern whose dominance marks the last green phase of the Permian world. These forests were thinning, replaced by drought-resistant flora adapted to alkaline soils. Carbon isotope data suggest massive swings in plant productivity, the first whispers of ecosystem fatigue. With each year of drought, herbivores weakened and predators adapted further. Every scarcity carved intelligence into bone. Predation, by now, was not chaos, it was order enforced through violence. Dimetrodon's bite mechanics, reconstructed from jaw fossils, reveal pressures exceeding 1,500 newtons, powerful enough to pierce the armor of even mature pariasaurs. Yet those same predators depended on the very stability they consumed. Fossil assemblages from the Texas redbeds display predator-prey ratios nearing 1:2, a density too high to sustain balance. Apex life had reached critical mass. Dominion carries its own gravity. In the later Permian strata, bone diversity thins. Growth rings compress, suggesting shorter lifespans and harsher conditions. The climate itself had become an adversary. Magnetic signatures in volcanic layers trace vast eruptions in what is now Siberia, early stirrings of the traps that would one day poison air and sea. The world of kings stood on trembling ground, though they could not know it. Even within their strength lay fragility. The same adaptations that ensured dominance, high metabolism, large body size, and reliance on constant prey became liabilities in scarcity. Smaller reptiles began to resurface in the fossil record, their compact forms and lower energy needs offering quite an advantage. Evolution, impartial and cold, began to favor restraint over excess. In the red beds of Texas, paleontologists now read this story in stone. Growth lines in Dimetrodon bones become erratic. Tooth enamel shows stress microfractures from repeated famine. Chemical residues hint at changing groundwater chemistry, a slow poisoning of the land. And still, the bones of predator and prey lie interlocked, eternal in their final act, beneath layers of rust-coloured silt. Under a red sky, even the kings of the desert felt the tremor of change. Far to the north, fissures opened in the crust, and the scent of sulphur crept into the wind. The ground itself began to pulse with heat from below, as though the planet's heart were stirring. In the stillness before dawn, the dunes seemed to whisper, and every living thing, predator and prey alike, paused, listening to something vast moving in the dark beneath them. Fire in the earth. Where deserts stretched endlessly and silently, the planet's bones began to move. The sand that once shimmered beneath the march of predators now trembled with hidden pressure. From deep within the mantle, molten currents rose through fractures, splitting the crust like overstrained glass. The world, which had once burned with life, now burned from within. From the silence that followed dominance, the earth entered a fever. The same sunlight that once glinted on, scaled backs now struggled through a haze of ash and acid. Across the vast interior of Pangaea, fissures tore open along fault lines that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The air filled with the breath of the underworld, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane, released in volumes that dwarfed any eruption known to humankind. What began as isolated fountains of lava became a continental wound that bled for millennia. In Siberia, a cataclysmic system of eruptions, known today as the Siberian Traps, transformed the surface of the planet into a furnace. Over 2 million years, basalt floods piled, layer upon layer, covering more than 7 million square kilometers and reaching depths of over a kilometer. Each pulse of magma ignited the coal beds and oil shales buried in the crust, releasing dense plumes of halocarbons and aerosols into the stratosphere. These chemical reactions tore apart the ozone layer, exposing the land to lethal ultraviolet radiation. The sky, filtered through sulfur haze, turned the color of iron. The climate spiraled into chaos. Paleotemperature reconstructions from oxygen isotopes show that global temperatures rose by more than 6 degrees Celsius in less than 60,000 years, a rate faster than nearly any known in the geologic record. In the oceans, rising acidity dissolved calcium carbonate, silencing reefs that had flourished since the Cambrian. The carbon cycle, once stabilized by photosynthetic forests and marine plankton, collapsed into imbalance. As land plants died, carbon storage ceased, amplifying greenhouse feedback loops. What followed was not a single extinction but a chain reaction, consuming ecosystems from the sea floor to the high plateaus. For a time, life resisted. Gorgonopsids, the saber-toothed hunters of the red deserts, still prowled the heat-hazed plains. Their bodies adapted to dry wind and hunger. Dicynodonts grazed along shrinking riverbeds, their tusked faces caked in dust. But as drought deepened and oxygen levels fell to half their former concentration, even the most resilient species faltered. Forests burned without end. Spores in the fossil record blackened into layers of soot known as the fungal spike, evidence of global decay. Bones uncovered in the Karoo Basin reveal creatures that perished, mid-motion lungs collapsed, heat-shocked and suffocated. In the oceans, the devastation was even greater. Anoxia spread from the abyss upward, stripping the water of oxygen and turning it toxic. Hydrogen sulfide, released from anaerobic bacteria, reacted with metals to stain sediments, green and purple signs of a world that had lost its breath. Marine fossils vanish across this interval: trilobites, rugose corals, and nearly all brachiopods. Only a handful of opportunistic species, like Lingula, a humble burrowing brachiopod, endured the poisoned tides. Geologists reading these rocks find no sharp boundary but a drawn-out suffocation. Mercury spikes in sediment layers trace volcanic pulses, while nickel isotopes hint at chemical weathering on a planetary scale. In Greenland and South China, sediments tell the same story. The oceans warmed, oxygen fell, and ecosystems imploded. The extinction curve steepened until it reached the sharpest cliff in Earth's fossil record, the Permian-Triassic boundary, approximately 252 million years ago. Here, more than 90% of marine life and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates vanished. It was not simply extinction, it was a collapse. And yet, not all perished. Amid the wreckage, a few lineages clung to existence. Lystrosaurus, a stocky herbivore with powerful forelimbs, dug into ashy ground and survived where others fell. Its fossils, found from Antarctica to Mongolia, suggest it dominated the early Triassic landscape, a single genus making up nearly 90% of all known vertebrate remains in some layers. Its success was not born of strength, but of adaptability, a tolerance for drought, rapid growth, and perhaps a low metabolic demand suited for thin air. Thrinaxodon, a small burrowing synapsid, weathered the chaos underground, its fur-lined body an evolutionary whisper of mammals yet to come. In the buried sediments of Meishan, China, geochemists have found a narrow horizon enriched in soot and iridium, chemical fingerprints of combustion and volcanism on a planetary scale. Tiny glass spherules within that layer, microtectites, mark the rain of molten debris from the skies. Even the deep-sea sediments of the Panthalassic Ocean, now uplifted in Japan, show evidence of this great burning, as if the entire world were wrapped in fire. When the volcanoes finally stilled, the silence that followed was vast. Temperatures began to fall as weathering of silicate rocks drew carbon dioxide back into stone. Slowly, the balance shifted. The air cleared enough for sunlight to pierce through. Ash turned to soil, and the first green returned lycopsids and seed ferns, pioneers of barren plains. The record of this fragile recovery is called the disaster fauna, a biological aftermath where ecosystems were rebuilt molecule by molecule, life learning again how to inhabit its wounded home. Within this quiet regrowth, the earliest archosauriforms, ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs, began to appear. Their bodies, sleek and upright, hinted at new strategies. Stronger lungs, efficient hearts, and postures suited to endurance. Evolution had not stopped, it had recalibrated. The survivors of the Permian firestorm carried genetic blueprints that would shape the Mesozoic world, a world born not from triumph, but from trauma. As the Permian drew its last breath, the continents cooled beneath a new sun. Black plateaus of basalt hardened into wind-polished plains. The seas, though quiet, still shimmered with faint green life. And below the crust, heat continued to hum, the planet never truly still, only slower. When the world burned from within, life did not vanish. It bent, adapted, and endured. And from ash and silence, new predators would one day emerge to rebuild life. The architects of recovery. When the fires dimmed, the earth lay bare, its silence stretching across continents. The ash of 10 million years carpeted the plains of Pangaea, and the air still tasted faintly of sulfur. Oceans stirred weakly under skies washed pale with dust. Yet beneath this exhausted calm, chemistry began its patient work. Carbon levels dropped, oxygen crept back into the seas, and from the wreckage of extinction, the smallest traces of life began to return. Mist rolled over new rivers, and in the steaming plains, the first survivors stirred. Lystrosaurus squat, tusked, and stubborn trundled through the ferns, one of the few vertebrates to outlast the inferno. Alongside it crept Thranaxodon, a shrew-like synapsid that slept in burrows to escape the day's heat. The Triassic dawn was raw and unfinished, a world caught between desolation and renewal. Forests were patchy, rivers unpredictable, and the sun carried a sharp, metallic glare. Yet each dawn brought one more heartbeat, one more leaf, one more step toward balance. Recovery was not immediate. It was engineered through mutation and chance. The Earth's biosphere had to relearn its rhythms: photosynthesis in the shallows, respiration in the air, predation on land. In the oceans, planktonic algae bloomed again, turning the seas from rust red to green. On land, soil microbes rebuilt the foundation of food webs. Fossilized spores in Triassic sediment layers record this gradual pulse, a geologic heartbeat quickening after eons of stillness. Life was inventing itself anew. Where Permian predators once ruled, only lizards and lungfish remained to claim the dust. With the gorgonopsids gone and amphibians diminished, reptiles inherited a planet of opportunity. Empty niches meant freedom, and freedom meant experimentation. In this creative vacuum, natural selection took risks. Some reptiles grew longer limbs, others thickened their rib cages for deeper breathing. The evolutionary field was wide open, and the results were unpredictable, like the scattered drafts of a rebuilding architect. Over the next 10 million years, evolution moved like a craftsman, slow, deliberate, and patient. In the fossil beds of the Karoo Basin in South Africa, the record tells a quiet story of adaptation. The early Triassic layers are dominated by Lystrosaurus, a herbivore so successful that it made up nearly 90% of all terrestrial fossils. But in the younger strata above, diversity returns. Small archosaurs appear, their ankle bones hinting at upright posture. Each fossil is a sketch of recovery, a blueprint for what would come. Fossil evidence from South China's Guizhou province reveals another kind of survivor, the ichthyosaurs, marine reptiles shaped for speed and precision. With their crescent tails and elongated snouts, they were unlike anything before, the ocean's first true predators after the collapse. Geochemical analysis of their bones shows high metabolic turnover, suggesting warm-blooded tendencies, an innovation that allowed them to thrive in cooling waters. In these same layers, the earliest ancestors of Nothosaurus and Mixosaurus swam through reefs rebuilt from microbial mats, symbols of an ocean rediscovering complexity. Reptiles began to rise on straightened limbs, lifting their bellies clear of the ground. This simple anatomical shift, from sprawling to upright, transformed the rules of motion. With their lungs freed from the pressure of their own bodies, these new reptiles could breathe while running, enduring heat and distance in ways their ancestors could not. The innovation was both mechanical and metabolic, a merging of form and function that would define the Mesozoic age. The new Earth was a workshop of forms, fragile, fleeting, but endlessly inventive. In the humid lowlands of what is now Germany, herds of Plateosaurus grazed across fern prairies. They stood upright on muscular legs, their skeletons light but strong, built for reach and endurance. Paleontologists studying bone histology find dense vascular canals, signs of rapid growth and active metabolism. These were no longer cold, sluggish creatures of the Permian shadows. Their blood ran warmer, their hearts beat faster. As ecosystems diversified, so did behavior. Fossil trackways show herding patterns and migration routes, suggesting coordination and social learning. Carnivorous relatives, the pseudosuchians, began to dominate riversides and floodplains, their armour glinting beneath the sun. Among them, the first precursors to crocodiles appeared, built low and fast, capable of both ambush and pursuit. Predator and prey re-emerged together, locked once again in the ecological dialogue that defines life. The Triassic climate oscillated wildly between drought and flood, testing the durability of these new designs. Oxygen levels remained lower than modern, but bone growth rings reveal remarkable resilience. Reptiles grew rapidly in favourable seasons, slowed during scarcity, and resumed again. Carbon isotope records from marine sediments show the gradual stabilisation of global cycles. What had been chaos was becoming a system. What had been survival was becoming adaptation. Somewhere in this slow revival, the heartbeat of the planet grew steady again. Conifers spread across upland forests, seed ferns carpeted the floodplains, and insects diversified into 100 specialised forms. The air smelled of resin and rain, the mark of a biosphere reclaiming function. Evolution, once reactive, became architectural, shaping purpose from pressure, structure from chance. By the late Triassic, the architect's work had matured. The reptilian blueprints that would dominate the next 150 million years were already in place. Archosaurs, the lineage that would one day give rise to dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and crocodiles, now stood tall upon the earth. Their bones show complex air sacs and efficient respiratory systems, adaptations for endurance in an oxygen-poor world. Meanwhile, synapsid descendants of the old mammal-like reptiles shrank and retreated into nocturnal niches, their warm blood a quiet, inheritance of survival. In every corner of the planet, innovation mirrored necessity. In the seas, ichthyosaurs perfected streamlining, while placodonts evolved crushing teeth for hard-shelled prey. On land, early turtles experimented with bony shells, a living architecture of defense. Even the skies hinted at ambition, small gliders like Charavipteryx testing membranes that would one day carry true flight. Evolution was no longer just recovering, it was dreaming. As the Triassic sun arced over a reborn world, bloodlines diverged. One path led toward dominance on land, the other toward persistence in the shadows. The harmony of recovery gave way to quiet rivalry, a new tension humming beneath the calm. Footsteps echoed across the red plains, some heavy, some light, each carrying the future within its bones. And somewhere in that rising chorus of life, the architect's designs began to contend with destiny. The split bloodlines. From the reborn forests of the Triassic, life began to divide, not in collapse, but in design. The age of rebuilding gave way to the age of rivalry. From shared ancestry, two paths emerged, one that crept through the dark arteries of swamps, and another that lifted its gaze toward open plains and burning skies. The balance achieved in recovery is now fractured into purpose. Evolution, having stitched the world back together, began once again to pull its threads apart. In the low, steaming deltas, the water shimmered green and still, and a hunter watched from beneath the reeds. Its eyes, narrow and unmoving, reflected the rippling surface like twin mirrors of patience. The creature belonged to the crocodile line, the pseudo-Suchians, whose reign began not with speed, but with calculation. Heavy ribs anchored its frame, and its limbs sprawled outward, pressing into mud sculpted by monsoon rains. The earth's new rulers had not yet chosen the sky or the swamp. They were still experimenting with fate. Across the plains, its kin stood tall, bones lightened by air, lungs tethered to power and speed. The early ornithodyrans, ancestors of dinosaurs and birds, balanced their weight on narrow hips and straightened limbs. Their bodies rose clear of the ground, freeing them from the drag of posture. Each stride drew in breath efficiently, each motion recycling air through lung sacs that cooled and energized. These creatures were built for movement, the language of the Triassic wind translated into anatomy. The split was written first in the ankle, a hinge of bone that determined the future of posture, of power, of pace. In the pseudo-Suchians, the crurotarsal joint allowed the foot to pivot outward, granting sudden bursts and twisting motion, perfect for ambush. In their cousins, the bird-line archosaurs, the mesotarsal ankle locked movement to a single forward plane. That restriction became liberation. It aligned the leg beneath the body, turned the stride into endurance, and opened a path toward upright living. Evolution had divided not only the skeleton but also the philosophy of survival itself. Fossils from Tanzania's Manda beds show the earliest evidence of this divide. There, Paringtonia crouched in ambush, built low and wide, while Nyasasaurus, perhaps the oldest known dinosauriform, lifted its torso high to test the air. Both lived beneath the same Triassic storms, but their destinies diverged with each step. To one lineage belonged stealth and armour, to the other balance and breath. Their bones, now petrified in red sediment, record not a battle, but a conversation between two strategies that would shape prehistory. The crocodile-line archosaurs favoured armour and patience. Their ribs thickened, their skulls broadened, and their tails became engines of explosive force. Oxygen levels still fluctuated after the Great Dying, and dense lowland environments favoured animals that could lie in wait, conserving energy until the moment of strike. The Pseudotsuchians thrived in these conditions, from semi-aquatic predators like Ornithosuchus to sprawling land hunters such as Postosuchus, whose gait blurred the line between crawl and march. They became specialists in ambush, their strength a product of stillness. Their counterparts chose another path entirely. The early dinosauriforms began walking on two legs, their hips restructured for balance and stride. Their bones grew porous, latticed with air pockets that lightened mass without weakening it. Growth rings in fossilized bones reveal rapid metabolism, an engine running hotter than any reptile before them. This higher metabolic rhythm demanded open spaces, constant movement, and active hunting. In them, evolution rehearsed the mechanics of both predators and flyers. These were not reptiles of habit, but of horizon. Every division in evolution is both a loss and a creation, two halves seeking different solutions to the same problem of survival. Where the Pseudotsuchians grew downward, pressing close to water, the Avemetatarsalia reached upward and outward, chasing light. Both inherited from their ancestors a legacy of resilience, but expressed it through contrasting virtues: endurance in motion versus mastery of ambush. The Triassic world rewarded both, for its climates were fickle torrential rain one season, arid winds the next. By the late Triassic, the rift between these families had become destiny. Across Pangaea's vast expanse, new landscapes offered new arenas of adaptation. In the floodplains of the Karoo Basin, Euparkeria darted between ferns, an intermediate form hinting at what upright gait could achieve. In the wetlands of what is now Scotland, Ornithosuchus stalked its prey with crocodilian patience. Fossil evidence from the Chinle Formation of North America adds further proof of their divergence. Trackways showing some reptiles dragging tails, others leaving clean, bipedal prints. The Earth itself was writing a script of motion. Climate, too, conspired in their separation. Triassic mega-monsoons sculpted alternating belts of green and red forests and deserts trading dominance in rhythmic succession. Each shift in rainfall reshuffled the advantage. When rivers swelled, the swamp hunters prospered. When drought hardened the soil, the walkers of the plains prevailed. This dynamic equilibrium drove innovation faster than stability ever could. Selection favoured not the strongest form, but the one that could pivot between extremes. Adaptability became the new crown. Anatomy mirrored ideology. The Pseudotsuchians developed secondary bony plates, or osteoderms, along their backs' shields that doubled as solar collectors, regulating temperature as they basked between hunts. The Avemetatarsalia, lighter and more active, evolved efficient air sacs and hollow limb bones that dissipated heat through movement. Even their cardiovascular systems diverged. Early evidence of septated hearts suggests greater oxygen efficiency in the birdline archosaurs, while crocodilian ancestors retained a flexible circulatory design suited for both air and apnea. Evolution sculpted their hearts to match their habitats. Though divided by form and fate, they were bound by the same Triassic ambition. Each lineage was a variation on the theme of resilience, shaped by the same reborn Earth but tuned to different tempos. Their coexistence formed a balance, not of peace, but of tension, a biological dialogue that held ecosystems stable even as they evolved. For 50 million years, this uneasy symmetry defined the land, shadow and sunlight in perpetual rotation. In the red light of the Triassic dusk, two empires stood poised to shape the world's future. One lay hidden beneath the waters, its patience older than memory. The other strode across the plains, restless and unbound. Between them stretched a silence filled with potential, the interval before domination. Soon, the slow-breathing hunters would sink deeper into their element, while the swift-breathing walkers would inherit the land entirely. The horizon darkened, not with extinction, but with promise. The world was ready to grow immense again. Shadows of the giants. When the age of Colossi began, not all life chose to grow large. As sauropods marched across the floodplains and theropods carved their empires in motion, smaller creatures sought quieter dominions. They slipped through roots, into burrows, between reeds and coral beds, the thin places where sunlight fractured and power could not reach. The Earth's future would not belong only to the giants, but also to those who learned to live beneath them. Shadows from colossal limbs swept the forest floor, and the undergrowth stirred eyes glinting, claws shifting among fallen fronds. Insects filled the damp air, a living haze of wings and sound, and the new small hunters moved with exquisite timing. Early lizards, their bodies no longer bound to the heavy sprawl of the Permian past, flexed with speed and intent. Sphenodonts, distant cousins of modern tuataras, waited still as stone until the shimmer of a beetle betrayed its motion. In a world of enormity, patience was power. While giants reached upward, others moved sideways, finding futures in the margins. They did not need size, they needed access. The bark of trees, the crevices of fallen trunks, and the hollows under cycads became corridors of survival. Their worlds were measured not in miles but in inches, yet within those inches, evolution worked as fiercely as in any vast plain. Small bodies could shift faster, reproduce sooner, and adapt to every microclimate the Mesozoic offered. Miniaturization became an advantage. Smaller bodies required less energy, fewer resources, and offered agility in a world built for size. Bone histology from early Jurassic reptiles reveals growth rings, compressed and irregular signs of rapid metabolism and flexible life histories. In the warmth of stable climates, these creatures thrived by doing what the giants could not. They changed quickly. Their survival was not a matter of strength, but of rhythm, of matching heartbeat to season, shadow, and prey. Among the roots and ferns of the Jurassic forests, early lizards and sphenodonts hunted insects with precision. Fossils from the Kayenta Formation in Arizona capture their presence. Delicate jaws with interlocking teeth, agile limbs built for gripping bark, and tails that counterbalanced swift leaps. They lived in a green dusk beneath the canopy, where light filtered in streaks and humidity hung thick as breath. Theirs was an ecosystem within an ecosystem, a miniature Mesozoic of endless pursuits. Fossils from Holzmaden in Germany reveal ichthyosaurs preserved mid-birth evidence of full aquatic adaptation. In the same span of time that forests swarmed with minute reptilian hunters, the seas filled with creatures that had turned their backs on land entirely. From lizard-like ancestors that once crawled through coastal shallows, new swimmers emerged with torpedo bodies, dorsal fins, and tail flukes that mirrored those of dolphins yet to exist. Their bones carried oxygen reserves, their eyes grew vast for dim depths. Life was learning the physics of water anew. Limbs flattened into flippers, tails widened into rudders, and lungs deepened for extended dives. In Stenopterygius, even the uterus bore evidence of adaptation embryos, arranged headfirst for live birth at sea, no return to shore required. Plesiosaurus, with its serpentine neck and rigid trunk, glided through lagoons where ammonites drifted like coiled galaxies. Their skeletons told the story of commitment. Once the sea was chosen, there was no way back. Adaptation was not always loud. Sometimes it unfolded in silence, written in the curve of a bone or the span of a membrane. Above cliffs and deltas, the first pterosaurs tested air that had never known vertebrate flight. Fossils from Solnhofen limestone preserved their fragile frames in ghostly detail, the stretched fourth finger supporting a web of skin so thin it recorded the imprint of muscle fibers. Each fossil is a signature of defiance. The moment gravity was negotiated, not conquered, over millions of years, the background species became specialists, aerialists, divers, gliders, each a quiet response to power above. Jurassic air was richer in oxygen than the Permian's had been, fueling bursts of activity among creatures whose metabolisms ran hot and light. Insects grew larger, and with them rose predators built to chase, not ambush. Every ecological tier found its player. Lizards in the leaf litter, pterosaurs over the swamps, ichthyosaurs in the midwater dusk. The forests deepened, and so did the seas. Roots tangled around streams that emptied into estuaries alive with reptilian forms. Temnodontosaurus, large enough to rival a modern orca, patrolled the shallows where once amphibians ruled. Juveniles hunted in schools, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Even the predators of the deep had learned community, an intelligence of proximity that increased their reach. In these transitions, evolution displayed a new logic. The grandeur of the giants had defined power by scale. The survivors beneath them redefined it by strategy. They taught the age that flexibility could rival bulk, that innovation was its own armor. Fossil layers from Britain to China reveal this mosaic of adaptation species diverging in form, yet converging in purpose, to occupy every unclaimed space. The distinction between land and sea blurred. Some reptiles took to the air, others sank deeper into salt water. Both paths required the same leap of design: lighter skeletons, strengthened hearts, and metabolisms tuned to motion. The earth was no longer a static surface to walk upon, but a volume to move through, a medium of flight, of glide, of dive. Each discovery multiplied possibilities, as if evolution itself were experimenting in directions too numerous for giants to follow. For all its quiet, this was an age of triumph. Every flutter between ferns, every ripple beneath the surf, carried the same message: life need not dominate to endure. In the margins of power, diversity found room to bloom. The fossils of these small innovators, often overlooked beside their towering contemporaries, record not insignificance but success, a billion years' worth of evolutionary rehearsal for the wonders to come. As the seas brightened and the forests deepened, the shadows began to shimmer. From treetops, wings unfolded to meet the rising thermals. Beneath waves, flippers carved silver paths through sunlit shallows. The hush of adaptation gave way to motion, to colour, to sound, the quiet foundations of mastery. Soon, the background would blaze into brilliance. Flight and ocean power waited just beyond the horizon, masters of sky and sea. From the shimmer of wings and fins in twilight, mastery took form. What began in the shadows beneath giants had risen into open air and deepened into endless blue. The age no longer belonged only to the land, it was now claimed by those who defied it. Evolution had learned to move without constraint, to leap, glide, dive, and soar, and in that freedom, life reached new dimensions. The first true flyers lifted above forests, still heavy with mist. Their wings were not feathers but membranes stretched between bone and sinew, tracing the geometry of wind. Dimorphodon and Eudimorphodon hovered near cliffs and coastlines, their sharp eyes scanning for fish or insects glinting on the surface below. Each movement was calculated: a tilt of the wrist to catch an updraft, a flex of muscle to adjust pitch and roll. The air itself became an element sculpted by instinct, a living field through which these pioneers carved their paths. The deep returned their shadow with brilliance bodies of balance and intent. Plesiosaurs propelled themselves with 4 synchronized flippers, cutting through water with a rhythm that mirrored flight. Ichthyosaurs, shaped like dolphins, yet descended from reptiles, darted between currents with sleek efficiency. Fossils from Holzmaden in Germany preserve their grace, even in death mothers giving birth mid-motion, their offspring forever caught in the act of emergence. It was a world where life no longer crawled or lumbered. It streamed, soared, and shimmered. Every design spoke of optimization. Bones lightened and hollowed, skulls thinned into aerodynamic shells. The pterosaur wing membrane, rich with actin fibers, was an engineering marvel, flexible enough to fold, strong enough to endure storms. Some, like Rhamphorhynchus, balanced with elongated tails tipped in diamond-shaped veins. Others, like Pteranodon, relied on vast wingspans and cranial crests to stabilize flight. Each innovation rewrote what it meant to move through space. While air was conquered above, the seas entered an age of refinement below. Ichthyosaurs developed massive eyes, some over 20 centimeters wide, able to see in the gloom where sunlight faded. Their vertebrae formed continuous waves of motion, tails transforming into sickle-shaped rudders. Plesiosaurs diverged. Long-necked forms like Elasmosaurus ambushed prey with serpentine precision, while short-necked pliosaurs, such as Kronosaurus, crushed ammonites with jaws longer than a man. Hydrodynamics and predation co-evolved in a spiraling arms race of speed and stealth. Pterosaurs like Pteranodon mastered dynamic soaring, riding thermals across prehistoric coastlines. With wingspans exceeding 6 meters, they could glide for hours above the western interior seaway, rarely needing to flap. Studies of bone microstructure reveal rapid growth juveniles reaching near adult size in a single year, sustained by metabolisms approaching avian efficiency. In these bones lies evidence of an energetic revolution, reptiles that burned oxygen like birds, keeping warm through motion rather than sun. In the chalk beds of southern England, the remains of Mosasaurus speak of dominance in the Cretaceous seas. Unlike their earlier cousins, these predators were not born for grace, but for power. Their tails evolved deep, vertical flukes, their jaws hinged open like serpents, lined with double-rooted teeth. Isotopic signatures in their enamel hint at elevated body temperatures, suggesting partial endothermy, a warm-blooded hunter in a warm ocean. The water world had grown intelligent in design, each lineage a calculated answer to the problem of drag and lift. In air and water alike, evolution converged toward the same truth: balance. To rise or to dive required constant negotiation with physics, a partnership between muscle and motion, resistance and release. The parallels between wing and fin, keel and spine, spoke of a unity that transcended habitat. Lift and thrust were merely variations of the same principle, expressed in airfoil and flipper alike. Life had found the mathematics of movement. To move freely was to defy history. For hundreds of millions of years, gravity had held every creature to the ground or bound it to the tides. Now, the limits dissolved. Pterosaurs glided across volcanic horizons. Ichthyosaurs breached in silver arcs against the sun. Motion became identity. The world had never been so alive with velocity, nor so dependent on precision. In the mastery of flight and swim lay both triumph and vulnerability, perfection balanced on the edge of necessity. Through the late Cretaceous, the masters of motion reached their zenith. Quetzalcoatlus soared over coastal plains, its 10-meter wingspan casting shadows larger than any bird to come. Below, mosasaurs ruled the depths, their echoing cries reverberating through coral valleys. The planet itself seemed in constant motion, air swirling, waves colliding, continents drifting apart. Pangaea had long fractured, and with its separation came diversity unbound. Ecosystems isolated, lineages specialized, and niches multiplied. Yet beneath the abundance ran a quiet strain of instability. Complexity, once a measure of success, became a measure of fragility. In the fossil record, perfection lingers as absence, the hollow where bone once pressed against sediment. In amber and shale, in chalk and limestone, we glimpse these architects of the open world, forever mid-flight or mid-stroke. Their forms are preserved in the language of symmetry, arcs, spirals, veins, curves. To study them is to witness evolution at its most elegant, but also at its most ephemeral. For all their mastery, the sky and sea would soon demand their toll. To reach perfection is to meet stillness face to face. The higher life soared, the longer its shadow grew. Currents began to change. The air thickened with ash and mystery. The continents edged closer to upheaval. The seas trembled with new volcanism. The masters of flight and tide continued their endless circuits, unaware that their dominion was approaching its limit. Above the bright waters and beneath the bright skies, silence gathered at the horizon. Beauty had reached its height, and what rises so flawlessly must someday fall. When worlds collided, the skies that once shimmered with wings and glided fins had grown calm, as though the world itself were taking a slow, collective breath. From coral seas to fern-shadowed plains, the age of reptiles stood in full splendor, a world balanced between grace and dominance, between the steady pulse of the oceans and the endless reach of the air. Pterosaurs traced spirals through amber light, while the last of the great marine hunters prowled beneath them, their movements as measured as tides. No creature sensed that equilibrium was about to shatter. Evolution had perfected motion, but perfection, by its nature, is fragile. Far above the calm blue curvature of the planet, a visitor approached, silent, invisible, inevitable. It travelled faster than sound could form, older than the continents it would destroy. For millennia, it had crossed the void, a fragment of creation carrying the memory of other worlds. When it struck, there was no warning. The sky turned to fire. Forests ignited in an instant. Seas rose in columns of steam. Air itself became a weapon. In that single heartbeat of geological time, the age that had ruled for nearly 180 million years came undone. Shock waves rippled through the crust, racing faster than comprehension. Mountains folded, rivers boiled, and the horizon vanished beneath walls of dust and molten glass. Where sunlight once sculpted the flight of pterosaurs, now only darkness fell thick, global, absolute. Photosynthesis collapsed within days, plants withered, food chains disintegrated, and the architecture of life that had flourished since the Triassic began to unravel. The planet's rhythm faltered. It was not merely death that arrived, but silence, a silence vast enough to reset the course of evolution. In the aftermath, rain turned to acid, oceans grew soured by dissolved carbon, and ash blotted out the stars. Temperatures plummeted, then spiked again as greenhouse gases surged from burning forests and rotting flesh. The very chemistry of survival was rewritten. Those that had once commanded the sky and sea, the long-jawed mosasaurs, the winged lords of the Mesozoic, vanished with barely a trace. Even the great dinosaurs, whose footsteps had measured time itself, were reduced to fossils in waiting. The dominion of giants ended not with a battle, but with a dawn that failed to rise. Yet within the ruins, endurance took new shapes. Buried beneath the ashen layers of the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, Scientists find tiny fossils of creatures that endured what titans could not: mammals, scarcely larger than a shrew, turtles sealed within mud, crocodiles submerged in torpor, and birds, the living fragments of the dinosaurs' legacy, whose hollow bones became vessels for persistence. In the fine boundary clay, enriched with iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in meteorites, the story of their survival is etched like a cosmic signature. Every grain whispers of impact, of endings, of improbable continuity. At the Chicxulub crater in the Yucatan, seismic scars trace the instant of annihilation. Beneath layers of limestone lie shocked quartz crystals, bent and broken by pressures beyond comprehension. Melted rock solidified into glass spherules that rained across continents, settling into sediments as quiet testimony. Around the Gulf of Mexico, these layers mark more than catastrophe. They define the boundary between worlds. Above them, life's story begins again, altered, reduced, but alive. Fossil beds in North Dakota's Hell Creek Formation reveal scenes frozen at the threshold of extinction. Fish impaled by debris, trees scorched mid-growth, and small mammals entombed in flood silt. Radiometric dating pinpoints these remains to mere hours after impact, offering a moment-by-moment chronicle of disaster. Yet even amid the wreckage, traces of adaptation appear: burrows carved deeper, seed-bearing plants re-emerging from ash, early birds with robust beaks capable of cracking the hard seeds that famine left behind. Survival favoured those who could wait, hide, or transform. In the oceans, the toll was staggering. Whole lineages vanished, and silence took their place. More than 3/4 of marine species vanished. Ammonites, rudest reefs, and countless plankton forms that once painted the seas with light. But as the surface darkened, a few resilient lineages clung to existence in deep or sheltered waters: tiny foraminifera, filter feeders, the ancestors of modern coral and fish. Their persistence formed the biological foundation for the next act of evolution. From scarcity came renewal, just as from the shadow of destruction came the dawn of innovation. Scientists studying isotopic shifts in the KPG boundary layers find that global temperatures swung wildly for tens of thousands of years. Carbon cycles fractured, oxygen levels plummeted, and ecosystems reset at every scale. The Earth became a laboratory of extremes, testing every surviving organism's limits. In that crucible, resilience evolved from necessity. DNA began to carry the memory of crisis, a coded inheritance of adaptability that would echo through future ages. Slowly, sunlight returned, tracing warmth over a planet learning to breathe again. The haze lifted, first revealing the ocean's dull silver sheen, then the green blush of recovering forests. From the cracks in burned soil, ferns unrolled their fronds once more, the first sign of photosynthetic recovery. In time, these pioneer plants would pave the way for new food webs, nurturing insects, then amphibians, then the small mammals whose night-born vigilance became daytime dominance. The silence that once smothered the planet now gave way to the rustle of leaves and the faint trill of new beginnings. What followed was not the same Earth. Its ecosystems had been rewritten, its rulers erased, its pace altered. But life had not vanished, it had learned. The impact that ended an empire had also cleared the stage for reinvention. In the ashes of grandeur, modest forms began to rise, creatures light enough, quick enough, and adaptable enough to thrive in instability. The cycle of life, fractured yet unbroken, resumed its ancient rhythm, though the beat had changed. Where an age collapsed into ash, inheritance began fragile, uncertain, and alive. Not in dominance, but in persistence. Not through might, but through resilience. The survivors, warm-blooded, sharp-sensed, and restless, would reshape the earth in quieter ways, threading endurance into the fabric of evolution itself. The return of the scaled. In the hush that followed extinction, survivors stirred, and among them the scaled endured. Where forests smouldered and oceans fumed, they waited, motionless but unbroken, the ancient rhythm of their blood unchanged. The world was quieter now, its titans gone, its skies emptied of wings, its waters emptied of teeth. Yet beneath the weight of ash and silence, life recalibrated. And in the new warmth of the Paleocene, when rivers once again glittered beneath a humid sun, the reptiles began their slow return. In the Paleocene heat, rivers wound through fern-lined valleys, where crocodiles basked like living relics of another world. Their armour caught the light like stone polished by centuries, their eyes half submerged, patient, unblinking, eternal. They were survivors not by chance, but by craft of design, lungs built for stillness, jaws forged for ambush, metabolism so deliberate that hunger itself seemed optional. Around them, mammals grew restless and bold, scurrying in the trees and probing at the edges of dominion. But in the water, the reptiles remained sovereign, their lineage stretching backward through time like the slow curl of a river returning to its source. Their secret was not dominance, but design of physiology tuned to patience and precision. Ectothermy, once considered a limitation, became an evolutionary strength. It demanded less, wasted little, and endured much. When climates shifted, reptiles shifted with them. When prey vanished, they slowed their hearts and waited. Bones tell this story in the growth rings of their tissue, in the pauses between seasons of abundance and scarcity. They were architects of endurance, their bodies composed not for conquest, but for persistence. While mammals multiplied in forests above, the reptiles ruled the margins, water, sand, and stone. These were the quiet kingdoms, where change moved at the pace of the tide. In the shallows, Pristichampsus prowled on long, muscular legs, a crocodile that had abandoned the water for the hunt. In the tangled roots of deltas, turtles resurfaced as living fossils, their shells unchanged since the age of dinosaurs. Every lineage seemed to whisper the same defiance. Evolution did not end with catastrophe, it simply changed its tempo. From the tangled swamps of South America to the dry basins of Africa, snakes evolved into ambush artists and constrictors of extraordinary scale. They were sculpted by stealth and precision, guided by a sense of heat invisible to other creatures. Some learned to climb, others to swim, their ribs and muscles weaving a new form of movement, a language of motion without limbs. The swamps of ancient Colombia concealed the mightiest of them all, a serpent so vast it hunted crocodiles. Fossils of Titanoboa, unearthed in Colombia's Cerrejón formation, reveal a serpent exceeding 12 meters in length, the largest ever known. Its vertebrae, thick as dinner plates, record an era when warmth suffused the planet and oxygen enriched the air. The Paleocene world, hot and wet, allowed cold-blooded giants to thrive. But as Earth cooled, such monsters faded, their scale traded for subtlety. Still, their descendants remained, slender and coiled, their evolutionary inheritance folded into smaller, swifter, and more enduring forms. As the climate cooled and continents drifted, reptiles traded size for diversity, geckos clung to canopies, skinks tunneled beneath roots. The age of giants gave way to the age of specialization. Each lineage found its niche. Desert monitors perfecting thermoregulation beneath shifting dunes, iguanas evolving salt glands to thrive on oceanic islands, and chameleons mastering colour and vision to vanish into foliage. Evolution no longer rewarded enormity, it celebrated finesse. The earth, now mosaicked by new ecosystems, offered 1,000 small refuges where patience could outlast change. Resilience became evolution's quiet revenge. Survival was no longer about might, but mastery of adaptation. Crocodiles persisted through ice ages and droughts, their eggs buried with unerring instinct along ancient floodplains. Snakes refined their senses, forked tongues tasting molecules of air, pit organs detecting the warmth of life through darkness. Lizards diversified into thousands of forms, from armoured, girdled lizards to the feather-light geckos clinging to ceilings. The reptiles had transformed endurance into art, their stillness concealing an unbroken intelligence. In the Miocene, when continents finally assumed their modern shape, the balance between heat and life stabilized. Rainforests spread, deserts hardened, and reptiles thrived across both extremes. The Varanus lineage, ancestors of modern monitors and Komodo dragons, rose as terrestrial hunters of remarkable cunning. Their forked tongues mapped scent trails, invisible to eyes. Their muscular tails balanced their lunging strikes. In Australia and the Indonesian islands, they would persist for millions of years, growing into the apex predators of the modern tropics. Even as mammals claimed dominance, reptiles never retreated. They learned coexistence, occupying the edges, the margins of rivers, the cracks in cliffs, the crevices of deserts. Fossil evidence from across the Cenozoic records their subtle triumphs. Gavialis in the slow waters of India, Alligator sinensis in the cool rivers of China, Varanus priscus stalking the Pleistocene plains of Australia. Each was a different answer to the same question: how to endure in a world no longer built for them. Today, reptiles inhabit nearly every biome, from Komodo's volcanic slopes to the frozen fringes of the Himalayas. They swim beneath Antarctic ice, burrow into Sahara dunes, and glide through rainforest canopies. Around 11,000 species persist, their collective presence a living testament to quiet perfection. Evolution did not forget them, it refined them. And while mammals redefined dominance, reptiles redefined survival endurance, measured not by conquest, but by continuity. In every flicker of scale and flick of tongue lies an inheritance older than memory endurance made flesh. Across rivers and deserts, beneath canopies and cities, the same slow rhythm endures. What began in the Paleocene's warmth continues beneath the modern sun, unbroken by time or upheaval. The lineage of the scaled has not vanished, it has simply become invisible through mastery. And as the world enters an age shaped by precision and awareness, these silent heirs of prehistory remind us that resilience, too, evolves from prehistoric persistence to modern precision. Engines of precision, even in stillness, evolution continued its patient work not through bulk or spectacle, but through refinement. What the titans of the Mesozoic had achieved with raw strength, their descendants pursued through design. Muscles coiled like compressed springs, eyes adjusted to both light and heat, and chemistry itself became the new language of survival. No longer were these creatures rulers through force or ferocity. They had become the artisans of adaptation, shaped for endurance rather than conquest, for efficiency rather than excess. Venom turned biochemistry into a strategy of elegance and lethality. Within the glands of cobras, vipers, and monitor lizards, nature assembled one of its most intricate weapons, a molecular orchestra tuned to disable, digest, and defend. What began as a simple modification of saliva evolved into a system of astonishing control, capable of subduing prey with surgical accuracy. Venom was not an act of rage, but the quiet perfection of efficiency, violence distilled into design. In the depths of tropical nights, pit vipers see not colour or shape, but the pulse of heat itself. Hidden between their facial scales are thermal pits lined with a network of microscopic nerve endings, sensitive enough to register the faint warmth of blood through darkness. A heartbeat becomes a signal, a flicker of life against the cool geometry of leaves and air. The world they perceive is one of gradients and energy, where every movement glows against the background of night. Their strikes unfold with such precision that thought becomes unnecessary. Instinct itself performs the calculation. A single attack lasts less than a heartbeat, yet behind that flicker lies the arithmetic of ages. The serpent wastes nothing. Every ounce of movement is accounted for, every pulse of energy directed toward completion. Its body operates like an equation resolved to perfection, a living embodiment of nature's relentless refinement. In that moment of motion, evolution achieves balance, the proof written in flesh rather than numbers. While mammals built their advantage from cognition and complexity, reptiles achieved mastery through restraint. Thought demands energy, and energy is scarce. To act without waste, to live within the narrow margin between hunger and heat, became their philosophy of existence. Their brilliance lies not in intelligence but in economy, the art of precision under pressure. In the arithmetic of survival, they discovered that simplicity, perfectly executed, could be a higher form of genius. Infrared sensors within pit organs can register temperature differences as small as 0.003 of a degree Celsius, a feat that challenges even our most advanced instruments. In these creatures, biology and physics converge, creating a system that perceives not merely to see, but to survive. Their bodies function as both organism and mechanism, each adaptation a device calibrated by time. Elsewhere, on stone walls and glass panes, the gecko demonstrates another kind of perfection movement born from molecular attraction. Beneath each toe lie millions of tiny hairs, or setae, each branching into nanoscale tips that cling through Van der Waals forces, the faint pull between atoms. No suction, no glue, no secretion, only the quiet handshake of matter itself. This invisible connection allows a gecko to hang upside down, to sprint across ceilings, and to vanish up a sheer surface with no sound at all. Against gravity, it does not struggle, it simply understands. The chameleon offers yet another expression of precision, a balance between patience and velocity. The tongue, coiled like a spring of flesh, launches outward at 50 times the force of gravity, striking with impossible accuracy. In that motion, energy and geometry become one, a perfect exchange between intent and execution. Each strike is not an act of aggression, but of inevitability, nature's version of certainty. Regeneration speaks to another kind of mastery, recovery as precision. When a lizard drops its tail in defense, the act seems violent, a surrender to escape. Yet beneath the surface, a complex symphony of repair begins. Cells awaken, multiply, and migrate along invisible scaffolds, rebuilding cartilage, muscle, and nerve with astonishing fidelity. The process reveals a different truth about perfection, that it is not the absence of loss, but the ability to rebuild what has been broken with measured exactness. Across eons, reptilian design advanced through this quiet refinement, not a series of dramatic leaps, but an accumulation of minute adjustments. Every adaptation was an answer written in the language of necessity, a dialogue between environment and form. What once ruled through dominance now ruled through precision, a subtler but more enduring power. Even their silence carries the weight of calculation. A crocodile waits at the water's edge, its eyes level with the surface, its breath shallow and unbroken. Beneath the stillness lies a body tuned to the instant. A sudden coil of motion, a single release, and the surface closes again as if nothing had moved at all. The efficiency of that act, perfected across millions of years, speaks to the same principle that governs all their design, to do only what must be done, and to do it flawlessly. Precision, in these forms, is not cold or mechanical. It is alive, an awareness woven into tissue and bone, a kind of intelligence expressed through instinct rather than thought. Every fang, every muscle fibre, every sensory organ exists in exquisite proportion to the world around it. The reptiles are not remnants of a vanished age, but living evidence of nature's capacity for refinement, its patience in crafting systems that endure. Through them, entire ecosystems found equilibrium. Reptiles became both predator and regulator, shaping populations, maintaining balances, and defining the rhythm of life across wetlands, deserts, and forests alike. Each act of motion, each restraint of energy, became a lesson in harmony, a blueprint for coexistence. And so, the legacy of the scaled does not end in blood or silence, but in influence. What began as instinct matured into a pattern, and what began as survival became structure. Across continents, their presence redefined the balance of nature, guiding evolution toward new forms of stability. The Age of Reptiles had refined itself into something deeper, a living system built upon precision, patience, and perfect calibration. In that quiet dominion, life itself began to reorganize. From the pulse of a gecko's foot to the patient stillness of a crocodile's gaze, the planet learned the rhythm of efficiency. Power no longer shouted, it whispered. The reign of instinct became the architecture of balance, and the mastery of biology became something greater, an inheritance that would shape the very fabric of the earth. The modern dominion. Out of the age of perfection came a quiet authority, not of motion, but of presence. The reptiles that once ruled through teeth and speed now rule through equilibrium. They no longer dominate the world by force, they sustain it through restraint. Every motion, every pause, has become part of a deeper, slower rhythm, a governance written not in conquest, but in continuity. Along the world's river margins, crocodiles command the flow as if continuing an ancient pact between predator and current. Their bodies, still and deliberate, anchor the ecology of water itself. When they enter and leave the shallows, they stir silt and sediment, oxygenate mud, and redistribute nutrients that feed fish, birds, and reeds alike. Where they bask, they create clearings. Where they nest, they shape banks. In some wetlands, the grooves their tails carve redirect entire microcurrents, unseen channels through which aquatic life circulates. Ecologists call this bioturbation, but its effect feels closer to choreography, a steady, reptilian engineering of flow. Without these movements, many waterways stagnate, their balance faltering in silence. The crocodile, ancient and patient, remains the unseen hand that keeps the river alive. On remote islands, giant tortoises sculpt entire landscapes, grinding soil with each slow step, dispersing seeds through the rhythm of their migrations. Their paths trace invisible networks of regeneration. On the Galapagos, their grazing patterns determine which plants thrive, which fade, and which forests rise in their wake. Their shells bear the dust of generations of ecosystems. Each seed swallowed and released carries not just life, but design, a continuity of forest composition written in their digestive journey. In the Aldabra Atoll, satellite mapping reveals vegetation patterns that follow tortoise trails, proving that these patient beings are architects of greenery, engineers of fertility. And when drought grips the islands, It is often the trails of tortoises that guide rainwater runoff into depressions where life gathers again. In deserts and grasslands, lizards perform the unseen labor of balance, consuming insects in volumes that determine the survival of plants, pollinators, and predators alike. A single population of skinks or geckos can reduce pest loads across thousands of hectares, their collective foraging more efficient than pesticides or traps. In the dry savannas of Australia, monitor lizards control carrion and rodent populations, preventing outbreaks of disease. In arid systems, their burrows become shelter for small mammals and invertebrates, microhabitats, carved by persistence rather than intention. When they vanish, an entire layer of ecological architecture collapses, as though the scaffolding of an invisible cathedral has been withdrawn. Their anatomy may seem unchanged for eons, yet their function has evolved from surviving the world to sustaining it. The same musculature that once propelled pursuit now moves sediment. The same jaws that crushed prey now shape the boundaries of ecological space. The design perfected in the Mesozoic now maintains the biosphere of the Anthropocene. Within the limits of their ancient form lies the blueprint for modern balance. Ecologists estimate that in certain tropical ecosystems, reptiles remove nearly a quarter of total insect biomass annually, a control system as efficient as any human-engineered model. In mangrove swamps and floodplains, the presence of crocodiles increases fish biomass by regulating overpopulation. In the Galapagos, tortoise-mediated seed dispersal boosts forest carbon storage capacity by measurable percentages. In Southeast Asia, monitor lizards influence nutrient cycling by redistributing carcasses and waste, enriching soil that sustains wetland flora. Numbers and models confirm what deep time already knew. The architecture of life remains reptilian at its foundation. In a changing climate, their ancient physiology offers lessons in endurance, a reminder that adaptability need not require reinvention. Reptiles respond to heat not by escaping it, but by mastering its rhythm. Crocodiles alter basking angles to fine-tune temperature. Lizards shift nesting depths to stabilize incubation. Tortoises retreat into the geometry of their shells, where centuries of evolution have built portable microclimates. Sea turtles navigate currents with an accuracy rivaling magnetic instruments, adjusting migratory routes as oceans warm. Their bodies are not merely survivors of change, they are blueprints for surviving it well. To follow a reptile's path is to trace the veins of the earth itself, where each action, no matter how small, ripples through a network of life. When a crocodile slides into water, turbidity changes. When a tortoise grazes, the wind carries its influence. When a gecko clings to a wall at night, the local ecology of insects recalibrates. In each case, ancient instinct becomes modern governance, an unbroken continuity between prehistoric intention and present function. Even the faintest movement of a reptile's tongue tasting the air is part of a sensory dialogue, older than mammals, older than birds, a system still tuned to the pulse of planetary chemistry. Yet their dominion is not confined to the wilderness. In cities and farmlands, reptiles persist in the margins of human space, quiet participants in the same cycles we depend upon. Snakes control rodent populations beneath foundations and grain stores. Lizards hunt moths along streetlights, balancing urban insect swarms. Even in environments reshaped by concrete and steel, they continue their work uncelebrated custodians of equilibrium. The sight of a basking lizard on a wall or a turtle crossing a rural road is not a remnant of the past, but a reminder that evolution's continuity still threads through our own constructed worlds. Their endurance has also entered the human imagination. In myth and symbol, The serpent circles eternity. The turtle carries continents. The dragon embodies elemental power. Across cultures, reptiles have represented not merely survival, but balance, a living metaphor for control through stillness, for strength through patience. That enduring image mirrors their ecological truth. Power, in its deepest form, lies not in expansion, but in harmony. They are not symbols of the past, but signatures of persistence, witnesses to the planet's memory, still writing its future. Through their quiet dominion, the planet's equilibrium endures. The forests they seed, the rivers they shape, the deserts they balance, all echo with their influence. The world they sustain is not only physical but symbolic, a living mirror of continuity and restraint. Through their ancient patience, we see our own place in the web they maintain. Power, they remind us, is not the noise of conquest, but the silence of endurance. And in that silence, the earth remembers, the symbol and the survivor. Reptiles persist across realms biological, geological, and symbolic, shaping how we remember the earth itself. The Age of Reptiles did not end, it transformed. What began as dominance became endurance, and what endured became meaning. Their ancient pulse, once echoing through rivers and forests, now lingers in temples and tales. The creatures that once shaped the planet's balance have entered the architecture of the human mind, silent witnesses, reborn as archetypes. They have survived what empires, climates, and continents could not. When the Cretaceous skies darkened with dust, when oceans boiled and forests burned, a lineage of quiet resilience carried forward. Fossil records show their persistence crocodilians almost unchanged in 80 million years, turtles crossing from fresh water into oceans that once drowned the dinosaurs, lizards radiating into every habitat from dunes to canopies. Adaptation became their inheritance. They did not rebuild empires, they outlasted them. Long before science gave them names, early peoples carved their likeness into stone, painted them in ochre, and called them gods. In Mesopotamia, the serpent Ningishzida guarded the gates of the underworld. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl rose as a symbol of renewal and wind. Across the deserts of Australia, the rainbow serpent carved the landscape itself, its coils forming rivers and ridges. In each myth, the same truth coiled beneath the surface, that creation and destruction are one motion, the turning of a single eternal body. Across civilizations, the reptile became an emblem, the dragon of the east, the serpent of Eden, the turtle that carries the world. In China, dragons bridged heaven and earth, guardians of rain and imperial power. In Hindu cosmology, the serpent Ananta supports the sleeping Vishnu, the universe balanced upon its coils. Native North American tribes spoke of the world turtle whose shell bore mountains and seas. Though continents and languages differed, the pattern repeated endurance sanctified, motion eternal. The reptile was no longer an animal. It was continuity made visible. Our fascination with reptiles is older than language, a mixture of dread and awe encoded deep within the human mind. In the flicker of scales, in the patient stillness of a crocodile's gaze, we sense an intelligence beyond haste. Anthropologists note that serpent imagery appears in nearly every early culture, its meanings oscillating between chaos and wisdom, danger and rebirth. The serpent sheds its skin and seems to live anew, an act so simple, yet so profound, that whole religions built their symbols of resurrection around it. To fear the serpent is to remember the forests that shaped us. To revere it is to honour the resilience that birthed us. In the human story, the reptile holds the role of mirror, reflecting both our terror of the wild and our longing for transcendence. It slithers between the sacred and the profane, between the forbidden fruit and the healing staff of Asclepius. Where the mammal evokes kinship, the reptile evokes mystery. Its gaze does not seek understanding, it reminds us of what endures beyond it. Studies of human neurology reveal that our brains still respond to snake-like shapes faster than to any other, a remnant of ancient vigilance turned mythic memory. The amygdala, seat of fear and recognition, lights up in milliseconds at the curve of a serpentine form. This reflex, once vital for survival, now fuels art, religion, and story. The symbol persists because the instinct persists. Biology feeding mythology. What was once a warning in the grass has become the whisper of eternity. Today, they persist not only in ecosystems, but in stories, icons, in flags, totems, and emblems, their presence woven into identity and art. The dragon dances at Lunar New Year. The serpent coils around medical insignia. The turtle appears in climate change campaigns as an ambassador for patience and protection. Nations guard Komodo dragons as living relics. Conservationists resurrect ancient breeding grounds for tortoises that outlived ice ages. Yet the paradox remains. The creatures most venerated in myth are among the most threatened in life. Their survival now depends not on nature's favour, but on our memory of their worth. They endure because we need them to, remind us that the Earth's oldest survivors are also its oldest teachers. Their myths teach what their fossils prove, that endurance is not defiance, but adaptation, not strength, but stillness. Through them, humanity glimpses the long rhythm of the planet, how life bends, breaks, and begins again. The serpent swallowing its tail is not devouring itself. It is completing a circle. In every age, they have endured the collapse of worlds and the birth of new ones. They crawl through the seams of history, unbroken, unforgotten, teaching us that to survive is not to resist change, but to move with it. Their stories, carved in stone, written in scales, remembered in legend, are the Earth's own scripture of persistence. And as their shadows fade into myth, what remains is their lesson, that life's greatest power lies not in dominion, but in endurance. In the long silence after conquest, only the echo of movement remains a ripple through water, the whisper of scales against stone. From their rise came the laws of pursuit and patience that still shape life today. They taught the planet that power is not only to strike, but to endure, to adapt until the world itself bends in response. Their legacy endures in every predator's gaze, every heartbeat that remembers the hunt. Subscribe for more journeys into the deep past where the Earth still remembers.